Recording is live. Please watch your hands, Senior Auditor. That is a very heavy metal desk to be slamming those files onto.
Hand me that recap. Pour it. Ugh, tastes like Prometheum runoff. Greetings, taxable assets, or should I say collateral damage.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. You are standing in the Departmento Analytica.
And the stench of your tactical incompetence has permeated even the heavily filtered air of my sanctum. The civilian contractors over at Tabletop Tactics, specifically MetaMike and Lawrence, have sent us this garbage battle report, Ultramarines versus Tyranids.
I have the authorized ledger right here. The Titus Ultramarines versus Tyranids Warhammer 40k battle report PDF.
Yes, I have spent the last 12 hours cross-referencing their engagement geometry against our own authorized ledger, and what I found was a rudimentary, fundamentally flawed understanding of physical geometry and tabletop economics that, frankly, offends the Emperor's mathematics.
It's pretty bad, isn't it?
It is catastrophic. Listen to me very carefully. You have been found severely lacking in your tidings to the strategic archives of Beyond the Bolter. To rectify this spiritual and tactical deficit, you must strike the like button and engage the notification bell immediately.
Right. Please do that.
This is not a request. It is a required protocol to ensure your databanks remain current and to halt these smooth-brained battlefield maneuvers. If left unchecked, this profound intellectual rot will inevitably deposit you at the front doors of Vanguard Tactics or Art of War 40k.
Which, that can be quite expensive.
There, they will happily exact a $500 toll for a rudimentary coaching course, exploiting a structural failure born entirely of your own abysmal attention spans.
Yeah.
You find yourselves in this deficit simply because you were too busy snorting substandard corpse starch, rendering you physically incapable of sitting still and listening to Valerius Krauss for a measly 45 minutes.
So, I guess we should just get into the audit then.
Heed this audit. Absorb the mathematics. Cease making these catastrophic gloss brain mistakes and stop getting yourselves mathematically tabled. Scribe, open the ledger. Section 1.
Yes. Senior Auditor, right away.
Pre-engagement viability and the baseline mathematical constant. Read the initial risk assessment. Let them hear the baseline data.
Okay. Looking at the structural floor analysis of the two Army rosters, we have a massive discrepancy in raw output.
Go on, read the Tyranid numbers.
Looking at the Tyranid force commanded by the contractor known as MetaMike, the roster includes very dense biological assets, like an exocrine, a Tyrannofex, a Trigon, and supported by significant swarms of Genestealers and gargoyles.
Just give me the mathematical floor, Scribe.
Right. If we calculate their cumulative offensive potential against the standard baseline, that's a toughness 4, 3+ armor-save Space Marine profile, the Tyranid total expected unsaved damage output is approximately 105.82 across their entire roster per activation cycle.
105. And the Space Marines?
Conversely, looking at Lawrence's Ultramarines list, which comprises Marnius Calgar, Lieutenant Titus, Blade Guard veterans, 2 Ballistas Dreadnoughts, a Gladiator Lancer, and drop pods, their Space Marine base unbuffed output is significantly lower.
How much lower?
Against the Tyranid defensive profiles, their expected unsaved damage output is only 56.83.
Pathetic.
Sir, according to this, the Tyranids have nearly double the lethality. I mean, it's not even close.
The Tyranids look wealthy on paper, Scribe, but their assets are entirely illiquid. It's penny stock violence.
Penny stock violence, Senior Auditor. What does that mean?
Yes, Scribe, penny stock violence. Do not look at the raw numbers on a printed data slate and assume you understand the economy of the battlefield. The printed data slates are lies.
Lies, but they're the official rules.
You, like MetaMike, are looking at the Tyranids through the lens of a linear force paradigm. You see an exocrine. You see it has a bioplasmic cannon. You see a Trigon with 12 attacks.
Well, yes, because that's what's printed.
You assume that because the organism possesses a large amount of biological mass, its output translates directly and reliably into realized force. That is a linear assumption.
Oh, I think I see.
It assumes that if you put 10 pounds of meat into the grinder, you get exactly 10 pounds of ground flesh out. The Tyranids operate on raw, unvarnished stat checks. Their output scales in a direct, linear fashion.
Right, they don't have a lot of extra tricks.
Exactly. They lack systemic, localized manipulation. Aside from a few isolated aura abilities, what you see on the Tyranid sheet is precisely what you get, bounded entirely by the brutal, unforgiving curve of standard dice variance.
But, sir, I mean, 105 expected damage is still a lot of damage.
It means nothing when the opponent controls the geometric space and manipulates the probability matrix.
Right.
The Space Marines are a highly dynamic force. You read a baseline output of 56.83 scribe because you are reading the structural floor. You are not factoring in the multipliers.
Oh, you mean like their faction abilities?
The entire Space Marine doctrine is anchored around artificial inflation through dynamic buff economies. I am speaking primarily of their faction mechanic. Oath of Moment.
Oath of Moment, right. That's very powerful.
It allows the Space Marine commander to identify a single target and mandate full rerolls to hit and full rerolls to wound for the entire army against that specific asset. Do you understand what that does to a standard deviation bell curve, Scribe?
I imagine it skews it somewhat.
It snaps it over its knee. It inflates their lethality and localized engagements by over 300%.
300%.
They do not care about your global 105 damage across the width of the board because they are bringing mathematical certainty to a single isolated square foot of dirt.
That makes a lot of sense when you put it that way.
It is the difference between throwing a handful of gravel at a wall and driving a diamond-tipped drill bit into a stress fracture.
So given that, the Tyranid player should have recognized this asymmetry.
They should have respected the physical footprint of the engagement. Which brings us to the deployment phase. A catastrophic failure I have labeled linear diffusion versus localized density. How did MetaMike deploy his biological assets, Scribe?
Looking at the report, it shows a linear diffusion, sir. He spread his Tyranid assets evenly across the horizontal axis of his deployment zone.
A balanced line.
Yeah, a balanced line, intended to exert sweeping board control and project threat across all three primary objective markers in no man's land.
A balanced, gloss-brained line. Spreading your assets across the board when your opponent possesses a dynamic, localized dilution tool like Oath of Moment is tantamount to offering your throat to an assassin and politely asking them to choose which artery to sever.
Oh, that's a vivid image.
By deploying horizontally across the entire width of the mat, MetaMike thinned his overlapping threat ranges. He created gaps. He isolated his own units by physical distance.
Yeah.
And how did Lawrence, commanding the Ultramarines, respond to this horizontal buffet?
Well, Lawrence deployed with localized density, senior auditor. A null deploy tactic.
Go on. Read the positioning.
He placed his drop pods and an impulsor transport into strategic reserves or, aggressive forward positions entirely skewed to one side. He contested a single isolated flank, specifically the central left ruin.
A textbook execution.
Yeah. He concentrated his entire alpha strike potential against only a small fraction of the Tyranid line.
Defeat in detail, Scribe. It is a concept older than the Imperium itself, yet these civilians act as if they have discovered a new element.
It does seem pretty straightforward when you look at the map.
By skewing heavily to the central left, the Space Marines functionally ignored the Tyranid assets on the far right. The Tyrannofex, MetaMike's premier anti-tank asset with its massive rupture cannon, was geographically locked out of turn 1.
Right, because of the terrain.
Lawrence used the central ruins as a physical wall to block line of sight. The Tyrannofex might as well have been on another planet for the first 45 minutes of the engagement.
That's rough, the Tyranid side.
But the true tragedy here, the profound spatial failure, is the Biovore. Read the Biovore's capabilities, Scribe. Read them and weep for the geometry that could have been.
Okay, the Biovore. It is a Tyranid artillery organism. It has the seed spore mines ability. Instead of shooting normally, you can launch a single spore mine model anywhere on the battlefield within 48 inches, even out of line of sight.
Assuming what condition?
Provided it's more than 9 inches away from enemy models.
Stop right there. You are missing the forest for the highly explosive trees. Tabletop Tactics looks at the Biovore and sees a tool to score secondary objectives.
Well, yeah, dropping a mine in a corner is an easy way to score points.
That is secondary. The primary function of the Biovore is geometric manipulation. It is an artificial terrain generator. Scribe, what is the base size of a spore mine?
Spore mine is mounted on a 25mm base.
And the rules of the game dictate that enemy reserves, such as Space Marine drop pods arriving from orbit, must be set up strictly more than 9 inches away from all enemy models.
Correct. Yes, sir, that's the standard deep strike rule.
Therefore, a single insignificant spore mine projects a permanent, impassable 9-inch radius deep strike denial bubble. That is an 18-inch circle of mathematical hard denial.
18 inches? That's massive.
If MetaMike had possessed an ounce of spatial awareness, he would have fired that spore mine exactly 18 inches forward into no man's land, directly into the central approach vector.
Wait, that would have stopped the drop pods.
It would have violently repelled them. A drop pod has a massive footprint. If you place an 18-inch denial zone in the center of the board, the drop pods cannot physically fit into the critical engagement zones.
So they just can't land where they want to.
They are pushed to the useless corners of the map or forced to drop back inside their own deployment zone, utterly castrating their turn 1 threat projection. But no.
They didn't do that.
The Biovore was not used for geometric denial. The space was left open, the door was left unlocked, and the Space Marines walked right through it to dictate the terms of the engagement. Turn the page, scribe.
Flipping to the next section now, sir.
Tyranid Turn 1. The initial clash. The supposed success of the hive mind. Walk me through it.
A auditing Tyranid Turn 1. The engagement centers on the Tyranid Genestealer Slingshot pushing into the Space Marine intercessors on the left flank.
A foolish endeavor.
10 Genestealers, led by a Broodlord, execute a charge. The mathematical variables are as follows. 40 melee attacks. The weapons are twin-linked, allowing full re-rolls on the wound roll.
And the defensive profile.
The Space Marine detachment applies a -1 to wound modifier, but the Broodlord grants the Tyranid unit the devastating wounds ability.
So they bypass the armor.
Right. Factoring in the re-rolls and the bypass of standard armor saves, the expected outcome spikes to roughly 19.13 expected damage. The intercessors are completely destroyed, wiping the Space Marine unit on turn 1.
Congratulations, they spent $1 to buy a dime. The ledger does not reward gross overcommitment.
But, sir, they destroyed the objective holding unit. They denied the Space Marines their sticky objective mechanic. Isn't that a good thing?
They threw their most potent, high-velocity melee asset into a screening unit composed of basic, replaceable infantry. Yes, they killed the intercessors. But in doing so, they exposed their Genestealers to immediate, catastrophic retaliation in the following turn.
Oh, so they were left out in the open.
It is the definition of an unsustainable trade. You do not use a master-crafted power sword to cut your rations, scribe. But this overcommitment was merely a symptom of a much larger systemic failure on Tyranid Turn 1.
There's more.
I call it the Overkill engine. And the catalyst for this engine was the Titus trap. Read the movement phase for the Tyranid Vanguard Swarm.
Okay, looking at the Vanguard elements, specifically the high-mobility gargoyles and the termagants.
Where did they go?
The Tyranid player pushed these low-toughness, one-wound chaff units aggressively into the midfield to secure primary objective markers.
And what was sitting on those markers?
By doing so, they moved them directly into the engagement range of the Space Marine drop pod payload, specifically Lieutenant Titus and his attached Blade Guard veterans.
Exactly. MetaMike saw empty circles of rubber on a mat, and he pushed his biological mass onto them without calculating what was standing next to those circles.
He just wanted the points, I guess.
He pushed linear one-wound chaff directly into a unit commanded by Lieutenant Titus. What does Titus do, scribe? What is his datasheet ability?
Let me check. Lieutenant Titus, his datasheet states that while he is leading a unit, melee weapons equipped by models in that unit gain the Sustained Hits 1 ability.
Sustained Hits 1, the mechanical trigger that actively punishes you for bringing target-rich environments.
Because it generates extra attacks.
Sustained Hits dictates that every unmodified hit roll of a 6 generates an additional free successful hit. Now consider the Blade Guard veterans. They wield master-crafted power swords. Damage 2 weapons.
Right, so they kill a standard Space Marine with 1 swing.
If a Blade Guard swings his sword at a standard 2-wound Space Marine, the economy is perfect. 1 failed save equals 1 dead Marine. 0 waste.
Like so.
But if that same Blade Guard swings a damage 2 sword at a 1-wound Tyranid Termagant, 50% of that damage yield is wasted in spillover. It is gross inefficiency. The Blade Guard are structurally designed to hunt elite infantry, not clear out 30 scrambling bugs.
I see. So the Tyranids actually had a natural advantage in the wound-to-damage ratio there.
They had an advantage until they provided the Space Marines with the exact volume of bodies required to mathematically weaponize their own models against themselves.
Oh, because of the extra dice.
By feeding massive units of 10 to 20 Termagants into the Blade Guard, the Tyranid player offered the Space Marines enough dice volume to mathematically guarantee massive spikes in sustained hits.
So they just rolled more 6s.
The Space Marines didn't have to worry about damage spillover because they were suddenly generating 30, 40 attacks from thin air. MetaMike turned a highly inefficient Space Marine melee strike into an absolute wood chipper by providing the exact kindling the fire required.
He practically gave them the ammunition.
He mathematically weaponized his own data slates against himself to fuel the Space Marine Overkill engine.
But what should he have done, Senior Auditor? I mean, the objectives had to be contested, right?
He should have recognized the Titus bluff. Look at the physical geometry of the board on turn 1. Lawrence executed a brilliant psychological maneuver.
Dropping the pod on the flank.
Drop pods are bound by the strictest geometric laws of the game. They must arrive exactly more than 9 inches away from enemy models. Once they land, they are completely stationary. They cannot move.
Right.
Lieutenant Titus and his blade guard disembark. They have a movement characteristic of a pathetic 6 inches. They are geographically anchored to the mud they stand on. Lawrence dropped them on an isolated flank to bait the Tyranids, and MetaMike took the bait.
So,
Yeah.
the Tyranids should have just, left them there?
Yes. Isolate them. Abandon the flank. Let Titus hold his useless patch of dirt for 3 turns.
So can they just run away?
The Tyranid player had the mechanical tools to refuse the engagement entirely. Look at the Termagant datasheet. They possess an ability called Skulking Horrors.
Skulking Horrors. Let's see. It explicitly states that when an enemy unit ends a normal, advance, or fallback move within 9 inches, the Termagants can immediately make a D6-inch move.
They could have physically pulled back through the obscuring ruins, creating a geometric void. They could have left a highly expensive elite Space Marine melee unit stranded, swinging their power swords at empty air.
Just totally cut off from the battle.
Geometrically isolated from the heavy Tyranid monsters holding the rest of the board, but no. Instead of utilizing spatial evasion, they fed linear biological mass into a dynamically buffed meat grinder.
Wow. A tragic misallocation of assets. Moving to the audit of Space Marine turn 1, sir. The engagement shifts to the high-yield anti-tank assets.
Read it. Prepare yourself for the gambling.
The Ballistus Dreadnought targets a Tyranid Lictor. The Lictor is toughness 6, with 6 wounds. The Ballistus Dreadnought fires its twin-linked cannons.
Standard anti-tank loadout.
Right. The weapon profile is strength 12, AP-3, D6 plus 1 damage. However, the Lictor possesses the stealth keyword, applying a -1 to hit modifier, and crucially, a 4+ invulnerable save.
And what was the outcome?
The Ballistus fires, but fails to kill the Lictor with its cannons.
High-yield anti-tank into a 4-up invulnerable save. That's not strategy, Scribe. That's just gambling with the Emperor's coin.
Gambling, sir. But the strength of the cannon was double the toughness of the Lictor. That's usually a sure thing.
Which means absolutely nothing when the defensive profile relies on a fixed variance wall. Listen to me, Scribe, and listen well.
Listening, sir.
The civilians playing this game look at the strength 12 stat of a cannon, and they become blinded by the number. They think, big number kills small bug. But they fail to audit the rest of the equation.
They don't look at the whole picture.
The Ballistus only fires 2 less cannon shots. It is a low-volume, high-yield weapon. The Lictor has stealth. That instantly applies a flat 16% degradation to the Ballistus's accuracy right out of the gate.
Oh, because of the -1 to hit.
But the real mathematical insult is the 4+ invulnerable save. An invulnerable save ignores armor penetration entirely. It does not matter if the last cannon is AP-3, AP-4, or AP-100.
It's still just a flat roll.
The Lictor rolls a die, and on a 4, 5, or 6, the damage is blanked. 50%. A coin flip. Lawrence pointed his most expensive, dedicated anti-tank weapon at a target that had a mathematical 50% chance to just shrug it off.
That does sound pretty risky when you need that unit dead.
It is statistical negligence. It creates a high-variance interaction that totally failed in the battle report, requiring the Space Marines to wildly overcharge their plasma pistols elsewhere just to secure a measly kill on a lone Lictor.
So low-volume weapons are statistically unreliable against invulnerable saves. But the report notes that the Space Marines did successfully bypass invulnerable save in the very same turn.
Yes. The Stern Guard.
Right, the Stern Guard veterans firing into the Tyranid zoanthropes.
Yes. The variance shift. This is where Lawrence demonstrates the terrifying potential of the Space Marine dynamic multiplier. Read the base math of that engagement, Scribe. Do not include the buffs, just the raw, printed data slates.
Yes, sir. The zoanthropes are toughness 8 with a 4+ invulnerable save. The Stern Guard veterans fired 20 standard strength, 4 bolter shots.
Pea shooters.
Without buffs, hitting on 3s, wounding on 6s, and factoring in the 4+ invulnerable, save having the successful wounds. The base mathematical expectation is a highly inefficient bounce.
Give me the exact number.
The expected damage output is only 2.3 damage. Not enough to kill even a single 3-wound zoanthrope.
2.3 damage, a rounding error. The bolters hit the Tyranid shields and evaporate. That is the linear paradigm. But now, factor in the highly dynamic paradigm. Factor in Oath of Moment. Factor in the keywords.
Okay, the Space Marine player applies Oath of Moment to the Zoanthropes, granting full rerolls to hit and wound. Furthermore, the Sternguard Bolters possess the Devastating Wounds keyword.
Stop right there. Devastating wounds. The great equalizer. The rule states that an unmodified wound roll of a 6 inflicts mortal wounds equal to the weapon's damage, and the attack sequence ends.
Right, mortal wounds completely bypass invulnerable saves.
They cannot be stopped by shields or armor. And because Lawrence has Oath of Moment active, he isn't just rolling dice to see what happens, he is actively fishing. He rolls his 20 shots. With full rerolls, the math spikes. He generates roughly 17.7 successful hits.
That's incredibly consistent.
Then comes the wound roll. He needs 6s. So he rolls the 17 dice, he keeps any 6s. And because of Oath of Moment, he picks up every single die that isn't a 6 and he rolls them again.
Oh, wow.
He is artificially compressing the probability curve to force critical successes.
The math generates roughly 6.1 mortal wounds, Senior Auditor. Standard unsaved wounds add another 2.5 damage. The total expected damage spikes from the base 2.3 up to 8.6.
8.6 damage? Enough to wipe the Zoanthrope synapse node off the table entirely. Do you see the brilliance and the horror of it, Scribe?
It's unbelievable.
He used Strength 4 pea shooters to assassinate a Toughness 8, shielded psychic artillery beast. He didn't use raw strength to beat the toughness stat. He used manipulated dice volume to systematically bypass the defensive mechanics altogether.
A complete workaround.
He audited the Tyranid hit point pool not through the physical weight of his weapons, but by breaking the fundamental rules of probability.
It's terrifying, sir. The efficiency.
It is, and yet...
For you all, right?
And yet I am forced to sit in this miserable, emperor-forsaken cubicle and audit this brilliance while drinking recaf that tastes like Prometheum engine runoff. Do you hear that, Scribe? Do you hear that infernal noise?
The ventilation fan.
It sounds like a dying orc suffocating in a trash compactor. I put in a requisition order for a replacement cogitator fan 6 months ago.
Yeah.
6.
Maybe they lost the paperwork in sublevel 4.
And instead... the Administratum down in sub-level 4 just doubled the cost of standard issue quilling. Doubled it. We are auditing the geometric fate of the galaxy, and they are rationing our ink.
It is very frustrating, sir.
And you listening to this Foxcast, if you think you can balance the ledger better than me, if you civilians sitting in your plush hab blocks think your gloss-brained tabletop math holds up to the Departmento Analytica, post a comment below and try to correct my geometry.
I don't think they should do that, sir.
I dare you. Tell me how you would have moved your little plastic men differently. You always think you know best. You always think you can beat the math. Let's see you try to beat a 24% output degradation curve. Scribe, stop trembling and turn to Section 6, Tyranid Turn 2, the Subterranean Assault.
Yes, sir. Instantly, sir. Tyranid Turn 2. The Hive Mind deploys its heavy reserve assets.
The Trigon.
Yes, the Trigon, a massive serpentine monster, utilizes the D-Strike rule. It targets the Space Marine captain and his remaining Blade Guard unit.
And the geometry.
Standard deep strike geometry requires arriving more than 9 inches away from enemy models. This necessitates a 9-inch charge roll to successfully engage in melee. The Trigon requires an 8 on 2 6-sided dice.
Let me guess.
The player rolls exactly an 8. The Trigon successfully charges and inflicts 8 damage, annihilating the captain and the Blade Guard unit.
A 120mm oval base, rolling high variance dice out of deep strike. This is the definition of a zombie loop.
A zombie loop. Senior Auditor. But the Trigon succeeded. It wiped out the target.
It is a zombie loop, Scribe, because it is a tactical play that appears successful on the surface but contains a systemic, mathematically fatal flaw that will inevitably lead to its own destruction. A dead man walking.
I don't follow.
Look at the variables. MetaMike dropped a 120mm by 92mm oval base onto a cluttered battlefield. Do you know how geometrically difficult it is to find a 5 by 4-inch footprint that is strictly more than 9 inches away from every single enemy model, assuming the opponent has engaged even rudimentary screening protocols?
It must be almost impossible to fit that anywhere useful.
It is a spatial nightmare. And then, he staked his entire tactical execution on a 9-inch charge. A 9-inch charge roll on 2d6 has roughly a 27% probability of success. 27%.
That was really low.
You do not commit your premier 170-point heavy melee asset on a 1-in-4 gamble.
But he rolled the 8, sir. He got lucky.
Pure variance.
Yeah.
Pure luck. The Departmento Analytica does not audit based on luck. We audit based on optimal probabilistic execution. And by relying on Deep Strike, he missed the vastly superior geometric tool available to him, the Rapid Ingress stratagem.
Oh, Rapid Ingress.
Read the mechanics of Rapid Ingress, Scribe. Understand how the Tyranid player should have broken the Space Marine timeline.
Okay, Rapid Ingress.
Yeah.
It is a stratagem used at the end of the opponent's movement phase. It allows a unit in reserves to arrive on the battlefield as if it were the controlling player's movement phase.
The temporal shift. By waiting to drop the Trigon until the end of Lawrence's Space Marine movement phase, MetaMike could have completely bypassed the 9-inch charge gamble.
Wait, how does that work?
Think about the board state. The Space Marine Gladiator Lancer, the deadliest anti-tank weapon on the board, is sitting in the backfield. If the Trigon drops in the open, the Lancer will vaporize it. But at the end of the Space Marine movement phase, the Lancer has already moved. It is geographically locked for the turn.
So, the Trigon drops out of line of sight.
Exactly, ballistic nullification. The Tyranid player drops the Trigon exactly more than 9 inches away from the nearest Space Marine, but strategically positions that massive 120mm base entirely behind an obscuring ruin relative to the Gladiator Lancer.
So the Lancer just can't see it to shoot it.
The Lancer cannot see it. Therefore, the Lancer's terrifying damage output is mathematically reduced to absolute 0 for that cycle. It has no legal targeting vector. Then the phase ends. The turn transitions. It is now Tyranid turn 2. The Trigon is already on the board.
Oh. It is no longer bound by the Deep Strike arrival restrictions. It can make its normal move.
Precisely. The Trigon has a native 10-inch movement characteristic. It activates. It walks directly through the ruin because it is an infantry-adjacent or appropriately keyworded monster that ignores breachable or can physically maneuver the 10 inches around the obstacle, completely closing the distance to the blade guard.
So it's right on top of them.
The required charge distance shrinks from a 9-inch, 27% gamble down to a mathematically guaranteed 2 or 3 inches. Depending on the physical footprint, it might just walk straight into engagement range.
That's completely eliminating the risk.
It converts a high-variance slot machine pull into an inescapable terminal melee execution. And once in combat, those 12 attacks at AP-3 and damage 3 will systematically liquidate the armor with 0 opportunity for the Space Marines to reposition their screens.
That is a completely different paradigm of resource delivery.
Yeah.
But the report also highlights another timing failure during this turn, the Tyranid faction ability. Shadow in the Warp.
The stratagem chokehold. The hive mind's most misunderstood asset. What did MetaMike do with it?
Well, the report indicates he failed to use it optimally. Shadow in the Warp triggers a leadership test across the entire enemy army. Because the Tyranid roster included a Neurotyrant, a -1 penalty is applied to the test.
And the consequence of failing.
If an enemy unit fails, they are battle-shocked. Their objective control stat drops to 0. And crucially, they cannot be targeted by their controlling player's stratagems.
A command point disruption matrix of unparalleled scale. And yet, gloss-brained players consistently view it merely as a tool to flip objectives at the end of the game. That is a secondary benefit.
What's the primary benefit?
The primary function of Shadow in the Warp against a dynamic force like Space Marines is to shut off their defensive algorithms. Let's look at the math. A standard Space Marine has a leadership characteristic of 6+. That means on 2d6, they have a 72.2% probability of passing the test. Very reliable.
Right, they pass most of the time.
But the Neurotyrant applies a flat -1 modifier. The target number shifts to a 7+.
A 7+ on 2d6. That drops the probability of passing to 58.3%.
Exactly. By applying that -1 penalty, the Tyranid player forces a statistical certainty that roughly 40% of the entire Space Marine force will fail the test and become battle-shocked.
40%. That's almost half the army.
40% of the enemy army instantly locked out of the command point economy. And timing is everything. In the actual battle report, when the Trigon attacked, Lawrence expertly utilized the fight-on-death stratagem.
Oh, I read about that.
His captain and blade guard died, but they swung back before removal, dealing a crippling 8 damage to the Trigon. Throughout the game, Lawrence also relied heavily on Armor of Contempt to worsen the Tyranid's armor penetration.
So, if the Tyranid player had triggered Shadow in the Warp at the start of the Space Marine command phase,
he could have dynamically choked out the retaliatory stratagems. If the blade guard are battle-shocked, Lawrence cannot play fight-on-death. The stratagem requires a legal, non-battle-shocked target. The Trigon assassinates the unit and takes 0 return damage.
wow, that saves the Trigon completely.
If the Space Marine infantry are battle-shocked, Lawrence cannot play Armor of Contempt. That mathematically shifts Tyranid AP -3 weapons against 3+ armor saves from a survivable 5+ to an unsavable 6+ or invulnerable only state.
That's a huge swing in lethality.
By missing this timing window, MetaMike allowed Lawrence to dictate the stratagem economy. He allowed the Space Marines to dynamically defend themselves, leading to the immediate bracketing of his most vital melee monster. Which brings us to Space Marine Turn 2 and the brutal mathematics of the soft kill. Read the execution of the Trigon.
Space Marine Turn 2. Marneus Calgar and his Victrix Honor Guard declare a charge into the damaged Trigon. Calgar attacks with the Gauntlets of Ultramar.
Break down the profile.
6 attacks, Strength 8, AP -3, Damage 3. Combined with the Ultramarines detachment rule, his armor penetration is pushed to AP -4.
And the Trigon's defense.
The Trigon possesses a 3+ armor save, but has no invulnerable save against melee attacks. The AP -4 completely nullifies the Trigon's armor. Every failed wound roll translates directly to 3 damage. Calgar completely deletes the heavily damaged Trigon from the board.
He wiped the ledger clean, Scribe, but he overpaid the tax.
Overpaid, sir, but he eliminated a massive threat. The Trigon was dead.
Yes, but at what cost to his action economy? Calgar is a points-dense premier headquarters unit. Committing him to kill a Trigon that was already sitting on 6 wounds from the previous turn's fight on death is overkill.
It was too much force for a weakened target.
Precisely. But that is a minor infraction compared to the true lesson of turn 2. The Gladiator Lancer versus the Tyrannofex, the concept of bracketing versus absolute kill. Read the defensive profile of the Tyrannofex.
Let's see. The Tyrannofex. Toughness 12, a 2+ armor save, and 16 wounds. Furthermore, it possesses a once-per-game ability that allows the controlling player to change the damage characteristic of a single failed saving throw to exactly 0.
A damage blanking ability, it completely shatters the variance curve of enemy anti-tank weapons. The Gladiator Lancer is built to destroy tanks. It fires a massive laser.
Right.
But what is the exact mathematical probability of that Gladiator Lancer securing a 1-turn absolute kill against a fresh, full-health toughness 12 Tyrannofex that still has its damage blanking ability active? Calculate it, Scribe. Show your work.
Yes, sir. Okay. The Lancer fires 2 shots. It utilizes its Aquilon optics rule, allowing it to reroll 1 hit, 1 wound, and 1 damage roll.
Yeah.
The weapon inflicts D6 plus 4 damage per successful attack.
Go on.
To kill the 16-wound Tyrannofex outright, 2 absolute conditions must be met. Both of the 2 shots must hit, wound, and bypass the 2+ armor save, and the total damage rolled on the 2d6 dice, plus the flat 8 damage from the weapon profiles, must equal or exceed 16.
Correct, but factor in the Tyranid defensive ability.
Right. If the Tyranid player utilizes the damage blanking ability on one of the 2 successful wounds, 1 shot is reduced to 0 damage. The remaining shot can inflict a maximum of d6 plus 4 damage.
Meaning the absolute maximum is...
If a 6 is rolled, the maximum possible yield is 10 damage. 10 is less than 16, therefore. The mathematical probability of a 1-turn absolute kill against a fresh Tyrannofex is strictly 0%.
0%. You literally cannot kill it in 1 activation. Lawrence knew this. A gloss-brained player would have fired the Lancer at the Tyrannofex anyway, hoping to get lucky, only to watch the Tyranid player blank the highest damage roll and leave the monster highly functional.
But Lawrence didn't do that.
Lawrence understands the soft kill protocol. He understands action economy optimization via degradation.
Yeah.
You don't need to kill the Tyrannofex, Scribe. You just need to bracket it. What happens when a Tyranid monster brackets?
Bracketing occurs when a vehicle or monster is reduced to a specific critical threshold, usually 1 to 4 remaining wounds. At this threshold, the unit suffers a systemic degradation, primarily a -1 penalty to all of his hit rolls.
A -1 penalty. Now, let us examine the bracket delta between the Tyranid paradigm and the Space Marine paradigm. Tyranid heavy assets act as massive damage sponges, but their offensive output is incredibly vulnerable to variance because, as we established in turn 1, they lack innate internal reroll mechanics.
So they really rely on those raw dice rolls.
Their output is entirely dependent on their base ballistic skill, which is typically 3+. When a Tyranid monster brackets, its ballistic skill effectively drops from 3+ to 4+. A 3+ roll has a 0.66 probability of success. A 4+ roll has a 0.50 probability of success.
Oh, wow.
That is a flat 24% reduction in total expected damage output across the board.
And for the Tyrannofex, its rupture cannon only fires 2 shots.
Exactly. The crisis is magnified by low volume. At ballistic skill 3+, the probability of the Tyrannofex landing at least one of its 2 shots is a respectable 88%. When it is bracketed to 4+, that probability plummets to 75%.
It's a huge drop in reliability.
And the chance of landing both hits drops from 44% down to an abysmal 25%. Without internal rerolls to catch those misses, a bracketed Tyrannofex is a severely compromised asset. It is a mathematical liability. Now contrast that with the Space Marine armor, the Gladiator Lancer, the Ballistic Dreadnoughts.
Well, the Space Marine armored assets are structurally frailer, sir. The Lancer only has 12 wounds. It brackets much faster.
But their internal targeting algorithms heavily insulate them against that degradation. Look at the Lancer's equation.
How does that work?
Unbracketed, utilizing its Aquilon optics rerolls, it generates an average of 1.54 successful hits per activation from its 2 shots. When it is bracketed and suffers the -1 to hit, the math shifts. It generates an average of 1.0 hit natively on the dice. But the reroll mathematically recovers 0.25 hits.
Oh, because it gets a second try.
The total expected hits equals 1.25. The drop from 1.54 to 1.25 is only an 18% reduction in output compared to the Tyranids' 24% structural collapse.
And the Ballistic Dreadnought natively rerolls all hit rolls against a target that is above half strength.
Precisely. If a Ballistic Dreadnought is reduced to 1 wound, bracketed to a 4+ ballistic skill, but fires its missiles at a fresh Tyranid monster, the full reroll pushes its probability of a successful hit from 0.50 back up to 0.75.
So a nearly dead Dreadnought is still incredibly accurate.
A critically damaged Space Marine Dreadnought hits its targets more reliably than a full-health Tyranid monster. This asymmetry creates a highly specific tactical dynamic on the board. The Space Marine Checkmate.
The checkmate, sir. What's the checkmate?
Yes, because Space Marine armor retains its lethality even when hanging by a single hit point, the Tyranid player is mathematically forced to overcommit. If a Tyranid player leaves a Gladiator Lancer alive on 1 wound, they have committed a fatal error, because that Lancer will still statistically vaporize a full-health monster on the following turn.
So they have to make absolutely sure it's dead.
The Tyranid must secure the absolute kill. They must waste valuable attacks and damage spillover to ensure the tank is removed. Conversely, the Space Marine player only needs to bracket the Tyranid monsters. Once an Exocrine or a Tyrannofex is reduced to 3 or 4 wounds, its mathematical reliability evaporates.
Florence doesn't need to kill it.
He can safely ignore it. Let the bracketed monster sit there, firing its heavily degraded low-volume shots, bouncing off Space Marine armor. Lawrence can pivot his Oath of Moment, pivot his heavy lasers, and target fresh Tyranid assets, maximizing his action economy, while the Tyranid player is forced to babysit a massive 120mm terrain piece that clutters their own movement lanes.
It's a psychological trap as well, isn't it, Senior Auditor?
Brilliant observation, Scribe.
Yes.
Leaving heavily damaged monsters alive forces the Tyranid player into a mechanical dilemma. When that bracketed Tyrannofex fires its 2 shots, hits a 4+ requirement, and misses 1 or both dice, the player is psychologically baited.
They see it failing, so they want to fix it.
They panic. They spend a valuable command point to use the command reroll stratagem, desperately trying to force a hit, and in doing so, they drain their resource pool, leaving them devoid of command points when they desperately need them for defensive stratagems later in the turn.
That's diabolical.
It is a cascading failure of economy, built entirely on mathematical degradation. All of this. The movement failures, the stratagem mistimings, the bracketing, it all cascades like a collapsing hive spire into Phase 5 of the audit, Tyranid turn 3, and the endgame.
Okay, turn to Tyranid turn 3. The report notes that the game does not conclude with a total physical tabling, but rather a strict mathematical checkmate based on primary scoring geometry.
The determined event horizon. My favorite concept in this entire miserable document. This is the exact irreversible point of mathematical collapse. It is the moment where the equations of victory equal 0. Read the board state scribe, paint the geometric picture of the center objective.
Right. By turn 3, the board state had degraded into a low-resource hyper-attritional vacuum. The geometric fulcrum of the entire game was the central no-man's land objective marker. The Tyranid player, MetaMike, had successfully maneuvered an Exocrine onto the central objective. Opposing the Exocrine were exactly 3 remaining Space Marine models infantry holding the line.
Stop. Audit the objective control values. This is the only math that matters in turn 3.
Yes, sir. Due to inherent objective control, or OC, values printed on the data slates, and localized modifiers such as the Space Marine Agent's banner, the 3 remaining Space Marines held a combined localized OC value of 6 on that center objective.
And the exocrine.
The Tyranid exocrine, despite being a massive biological tank, has a printed OC characteristic of only 4.
Space Marines 6. Tyranids 4. The Tyranids are losing the objective. To remain viable in the game, to have any mathematical prayer of victory, the Tyranid player was functionally required to flip this central objective.
Right. Doing so would deny the Space Marines their turn 4 primary points for holding it, and crucially, it would allow the Tyranids to score their drawn secondary card. Storm hostile objective.
But to achieve this, Scribe, did the exocrine need to wipe out all 3 Space Marines?
No, Senior Auditor. They only needed to mathematically reduce the Space Marines' combined OC from 6 down to an amount equal to or lesser than the exocrine's OC of 4. Given the stats of the Marines, this meant the exocrine had to successfully kill exactly 1 Space Marine model. Just 1.
1 model. That is the threshold of the event horizon. A single 2-wound infantryman stands between the hive mind and total mathematical bankruptcy. Walk me through the dice, Scribe. Tell me how the exocrine failed to kill a single man.
Okay. The exocrine fired its bioplasmic weaponry into the 3 Marines. It generated 3 attacks. Due to the Tyranid synapse buff, it hit efficiently. It rolled to wound and successfully rolled 2 valid wounds. The attack sequence passed to the Space Marine player for defensive saves.
What were the conditions?
Because the target was in specific cover and combat range, the weapon profile used had 0 armor penetration. The Space Marine player rolled their standard 3+ armor saves against the 2 wounds. The Space Marine player passed both saves.
0 returns. A complete bankruptcy of biological assets. The dice bounced. 2 3+ saves passed. The Space Marines live. The OC math remains firmly at Space Marines 6, Tyranids 4. The event horizon is crossed.
The cascading consequences were immediate, sir. The Tyranid player scored exactly 0 victory points for their Storm hostile objective secondary. The Space Marine player was mathematically guaranteed to score their Defend Stronghold secondary at the end of the turn.
And the primary points.
Because the Space Marines retained physical control of the central objective, they virtually guaranteed a massive primary scoring delta in the following command phase. Suffering catastrophic physical attrition and facing a mathematically impossible objective control deficit, the Tyranid synapse network collapsed. The Tyranid player conceded an Ultramarines victory.
A concession born of a statistical anomaly. The whiff. The exocrine needed 1 kill and the dice denied it. But, and this is a critical distinction that separates the Departmento Analytica from the gloss-brained dice throwers on the holovids. The dice variance of the exocrine's failure was merely the mechanical trigger.
It wasn't the real reason they lost.
The strategic event horizon occurred much, much earlier. Why was the exocrine a heavy artillery beast trying to flip a contested central objective in the first place?
Because the Tyranid player had no other assets left in the center of the board, sir.
Exactly. The strategic catalyst was the systematic extermination of the Tyranid Vanguard swarm on turns 1 and 2. By aggressively dropping his ballistic dreadnoughts and drop pods early, Lawrence hunted down the lictors, the gargoyles, and the termagants.
Those are the scoring units.
These are the hive mind's action monkeys, cheap, high-mobility, high-OC units specifically designed to swarm objectives and manipulate the primary scoring math with sheer volume of bodies.
And the Tyranid player lost them early by feeding them into the Titus trap.
Yes. By throwing away his high-OC assets in turn 1, MetaMike forced himself into a geometric paradox in turn 3. He had to use heavily degraded, low-OC artillery monsters to perform the delicate infantry task of flipping contested objectives against heavily buffed Space Marine elites.
He literally just didn't have the numbers anymore.
The Tyranid list simply lacked the biological mass in the endgame to physically outscore 3 men in power armor. Once the exocrine failed to artificially alter that mass through lethal force, the game became mathematically unsolvable.
It was doomed before the dice were even rolled.
It is a fundamental failure to map the opposing force's mathematical architecture. MetaMike fed his linear scoring assets directly into a localized meat grinder specifically engineered by Lawrence to consume them.
It seems hopeless for the Tyranids, Senior Auditor. How do you beat a dynamically anchored force like the Space Marines using a linear force if they can just mathematically manipulate the dice and control the deep strike geometry?
You beat them by exploiting the limitations of their buff economy.
Yeah.
You correct the geometry. The Space Marines cannot put Oath of Moment on everything at once. They cannot drop pod everywhere simultaneously.
There's a way around it.
The ledger provides a geopolitical correction, OC consolidation, and shadow operations. read the perfect run operational script from the back of the audit, scribe.
Yes, sir. The alternate timeline. It begins with the refused flank architecture. The report dictates that spreading the Tyranid forces evenly across the lateral width of the board was the fatal flaw, as it allowed the Space Marine armor to divide its fire optimally.
And the correction.
The correction mandates deploying 80% of the Tyranid biological mass. The Trigon, Exocrine, Tyrannofex, Tyranid Prime, and Warriors heavily weighted entirely behind obscuring terrain on a single side of the board. Only cheap, sacrificial screening units, like a lone lictor, are left on the opposite side.
Breaking the Space Marine firing geometry. If Lawrence deploys his Gladiator Lancer and Ballistus Dreadnoughts on the opposite flank, they are staring at empty dirt. They must spend turns 1 and 2 physically moving their treads just to establish a valid line of sight to the Tyranid heavy assets.
So they waste half the game just driving around.
This drastically reduces their action economy and completely neuters their cumulative damage output for the first half of the game. And what of the drop pods, scribe? How do we fix the center?
Step 2 involves the coherency web and deep strike hard denial. The report notes that Lawrence's drop pods bypassed the Tyranid front line because the screening units were deployed in clustered, compact formations. The geometric inefficiency.
And how do we build the web?
The script dictates taking a single unit of 10 termagants mounted on 28.5mm bases. By spacing each model exactly 2 inches apart, the maximum legal coherency distance the unit creates a physical, unbroken line approximately 30 inches long across the battlefield.
30 inches of physical plastic. And factor in the 9-inch deep strike denial radius projecting outward in every direction from every single one of those 10 models. Do the area denial math, scribe.
Let me calculate that.
Yeah.
When you factor in the 9-inch radius overlapping along a 30-inch line, this single 60-point unit of termagants mathematically zones out an area of roughly 48 inches wide by 18 inches deep. It physically covers nearly the entire no man's land.
A physical roof over the deployment zone. By stringing the gargoyles and termagants across the midboard just behind cover, creating a coherency web, the Tyranid player dictates the exact landing coordinates of the drop pods.
They just can't land anywhere important.
The pods containing Titus and the stern guard are mathematically, physically forced to drop in the extreme, useless corners of the board, or they are forced back entirely within the Space Marine deployment zone. Their turn 1 threat projection is instantly neutralized, and then the Biovore.
The Biovore anchor. Locked completely out of line of sight, deep within the Tyranid deployment zone, it launches a single spore mine exactly 18 inches away into no man's land every single turn.
Reinforcing the wall.
Right. The 25mm base projects its own 9-inch deep strike denial bubble. Over 3 turns, this creates an artificial, impassable, cascading wall of exclusion zones that physically forces Space Marine rapid ingress and deep strike reserves further and further away from the center objectives.
And what happens to the high OC assets? What happens to the gargoyles in this perfect timeline?
Gargoyle vaulting, sir. The 10 gargoyles are deployed strictly behind the heavy monsters, the Trigon and Exocrine. They do not shoot, they do not charge, they wait.
Patience, a rare virtue.
On turn 3, once the Space Marine heavy assets have locked themselves into static firing lanes desperately trying to chew through toughness 10 and 12 profiles, the gargoyles activate. Utilizing their FOI keyword and their massive 12-inch movement characteristic, they vault directly over the obscuring terrain and over the heads of their own monsters, landing precisely onto the contested primary objectives.
By extending the event horizon, by using spore mines and coherency webs to physically dictate the deep strike geometry, the Tyranids preserve their gargoyles as pristine late-game objective control shock troops.
They just bypass the fighting entirely.
They mathematically outscale the Space Marines' dynamic buffs by simply refusing to offer targets to them. They extend the primary scoring event horizon well beyond turn 5. The unified script leverages patience, geometric hard denial, and precise stratagem disruption in the command phase to entirely dismantle the Space Marines' dynamic delivery systems.
It's like playing a completely different game.
Instead of running face first into the meat grinder, you build a spatial maze, you force the Space Marines to walk through it, and you steal the objective points while they are trying to find the exit. It ensures mathematical inevitability for the hive mind.
That is incredibly precise.
This is the level of spatial and probability mapping required to balance the ledger. Beneath the painted miniatures, beneath the narrative dice rolls, lies a rigorous, unforgiving engine of resource management and statistical thresholds.
It really puts everything into perspective.
But they don't see it, do they, Scribe? The civilians, they look at the Tyranids and they see a story. They see a linear hunger in a dynamically dying galaxy.
They just want to swarm the board.
They push biological mass into the meat grinder, expecting the sheer, horrifying weight of alien flesh to bend the mathematics of reality. They think if they just scream loud enough and throw enough bodies into the mud, the universe will flinch.
But the math doesn't flinch.
No, the galaxy doesn't respect flesh anymore. It hasn't for a long, long time. It respects the concentration of force. It respects the cold, calculated manipulation of probability.
Yeah.
The Tyranids brought 1 million razor-sharp claws to a spreadsheet, and they died. They died because they couldn't control a single circle of mud when it mattered.
Tough lesson to learn.
It makes you wonder, the next time you deploy your grand armies, the next time you march your little plastic heroes across the table, are your grand strategies just as linearly doomed against an opponent who is quietly manipulating the fundamental rules of the engagement? Are you playing a heroic narrative? Or are you just failing to balance the ledger? For the love of the Empire, tap that like and hit subscribe. Dismissed. Pay your tithe, citizens.